Boom! What's up, everyone? Welcome to Simulation. I'm your host, Alan Sakyan. We are going to be talking about the future of masculinity. We've referenced this on the show before, but we are really going to be taking it deep in this show today. We have Dale Thomas Vaughn joining us. Thank you so much.
I'm so happy to be here.
It's such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful that we got introduced at WITI, Women in Technology International.
Yeah.
We love that group. That community is so strong. And we did a whole interview series with like a dozen prominent women. It was so refreshing to be there and just like, the power there is so real.
Yeah. A lot of the people there have gone through so much more than the rest of us, and are at the top of the world, at the top of the game, really, in the technology space.
Yes. Yes, and that is another part of the power. It's like what you get through, but also like what you've achieved as well. It's like, yeah. Okay, so you have a really cool background for this. So so for the last like how many years has it been of really being in this space?
My entire adult life.
Yeah, since 19.
Since I was like 18 or 19 years old, basically, yeah.
Yeah, so almost like 15 years, right?
Yeah, I started with being sort of in the triage space of like, how do I assert myself in helping end sexual violence? I had a very good friend who experienced sexual assault, and I had to kind of be there with her through that process of healing and trauma overcoming and survival and reintegration. And in that process, I realized there weren't any men involved. And to me, sexual violence is a men's issue. So at a young age, I started questioning masculinity. Where are all the men if we're not going to stand up and solve this problem? So at that age, it was triage. How can I be helpful? How can I be helpful? And there's this allegory that is in our space about where men fit into gender equality and ending sexual violence. And the allegory is about a village by a river, and the village, all the people in the village notice that there are these people who keep drowning in the river. They're calling for help, so the women and children start running out to help pull these other women and children out of the water, and they're helping them survive. Eventually, the men in the village figure out something's going on. This is a trend, and they start lining up to help. By the time they line up to help, the women have already figured everything out about survival, and they say to the men, go upstream. Go figure out what's broken. Why are people falling under the river? So at that age, at 18, I started learning upstream is about masculinity, the culture of what's broken about masculinity. Yeah,
and that in itself, the fact that you discovered that when you're that young is really important, because I think for someone, even myself, I'm 26 now, and I'm still like, what is going on with like, why am I just now really starting to understand what like objectifying women versus like understanding their heart and their soul and thinking about them that way first? Mm-hmm. Like, why am I really just realizing that now? Like, why does it take that long? It should be right away. The cultural programming gets to the kids at such a young age. So I would love to, I'm really excited for the rest of our conversation. So, okay, so at that age then, how did you go from that to the Better Man Conference and Good Men Project, Inclusionary Leadership? How'd the funnel happen to get there?
Yeah, so I went from like wanting to put my finger in the dam and hold back the tide to, oh, I need to do something more. Can I be Batman? Like, can I show up and start preventing sexual violence? And I started looking into that, and that seemed impossible. I'm not going to be Liam Neeson right off the bat. That's just not going to happen. I couldn't be in enough places, and even if I got 1,000 men in 1,000 other places to be Liam Neeson, it wouldn't be enough. So I began realizing there's something cultural going on, and that the only way to cure this, to fix this, is to prevent it, get way out in front of it. So I started working in domestic violence shelters, trying to understand what does prevention look like? Where does the systemic issue start? Is it starting with boys when they're young? Is it starting with men when they're like, at what age? Yeah. And at that point, I started learning, well, we have to, as men, start to sit around and have a conversation about our broken culture. We have to start to understand why we're violent, and we have to start to understand where that's coming from. In order to do that, you have to have men who are willing to open up, be emotional at times and vulnerable, and have a conversation about things that can be very challenging. There's no guide for this. There's no, like, never before has there been a questioning of masculinity on the scale that we're experiencing now.
Yeah.
So that took me down this road of gathering men. I've been doing since I was 18, once a week at least, 40 men plus, sitting around a room or hiking together or doing a conference about what it means to be a man. And so the Good Men Project and other sites came from that. The Better Man Conference came from that. It's gathering men and saying, what's broken? What can we fix? What's possible to change? What would that look like if we changed it? And I believe right now we have an incredible opportunity. That you look around, and I get freaked out, obviously, like the rest of us do, that masculinity is clearly toxic, clearly broken, things are wrong. And it's easy to get down. I can do that. I can get into that spiral. But I have to remember, and I think this is true, that the golden age of masculinity is not behind us. It's not in the past. It's in the future. Yeah. So that's where the Better Man Conference came out of. What can we do to make a better man?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, okay, so the future is the golden age of masculinity. And what we're doing with the past, like you said, you started gathering individuals to have these hard conversations about what's going on in masculinity. And this requires a lot of vulnerability, a lot of openness to be able to communicate about these things, a lot of willingness to change and transition, to respect women, give equality of opportunity to women, people of color, diverse opinions, neurodiverse thoughts around the world. And this was very interesting. We were talking about this before the show. I think it's really important to press, is that in Africa, there is just a black man that's oppressing black women in many ways. In Asia, it's an Asian man oppressing Asian women in many ways. And so in South America, Latin America, similar things across the world, the masculinity. This is not just a white man, but it is in many ways a white man as well.
Well, just because the virtue of the power of American culture, white masculinity exudes a lot of space. Like, it just takes up a lot of space in the world.
Yes, it does.
But masculinity in general has been a tribalistic concept. The idea of gender is still kind of new. Dissecting what gender is and how it affects us in our daily lives. I mean, feminism's not even 120 years old at this point.
Yeah.
It's been through, 3-4 waves at this point. We're at the very beginning of that for masculinity. So feminism has dissected what it means to be a woman in so many different ways, and masculinity is still trying to figure out how to talk. We're still trying to figure out the language to use. I mean, we are still, there's some people in our space who call it masculinities, as in there's a plurality of possibility within masculinity.
Interesting.
And so we're still at the language forming stage.
Femininities.
Yeah. Yeah. And why not? It makes sense when you start to think about it. Of course, there's more than one way to be a man.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
In many ways, we see that dichotomy illustrated. That contrast is with a man that is very stoic, or a man that's very vulnerable, or maybe there's so many of these different ways. Like a woman can also be very stoic. A woman can also be very vulnerable.
Right. I think we're entering a culture of nuance, or we have to.
Yes.
Like, there's a gray area in all of this space, and the mastery of any of this is the balance. So understanding when to be direct and when to be open.
Yeah.
Right. There are times when leadership needs to be point A to point B, the quickest possible solution, and there are times where leadership needs to be collaborative, creating consensus, opening up to as many options as possible. And so the balance of that is really where mastery comes in. And that's the culture we have to engender that culture. Otherwise, masculinity could be the thing that tips us off as doomed as a species, because we can't collaborate. Like, we have to fix masculinity because we have to fix humanity. Like, there's so much buried in masculinity that we can't fix without it.
I like using the word augment a lot. Like, we gotta augment masculinity.
I like that too.
Yeah, it's like really positive, forward moving type thing. Of course, it has to do with integrating the traumas and stuff as well. But but that's like augmenting masculinity to be masculinities, like you were pointing at as well. So now there's this whole past, present, and future nuance. Like you're saying, it's a renaissance of nuance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, a renaissance of nuance. I like that. That's good. TM. I've been saying it's the next generation of gentlemen. I just like that idea, but it's modernized. Like something's changing within that concept too. Yeah, we're in a renaissance period, which means we're in a change period, which means we don't know what the future exactly looks like. We just know that it has to involve collaboration. The world that we live in now is forcing collaboration, and it should, right? That's the way that we're going to get through any of the challenges globally that we're going to have. It's the way that we're going to deal with poverty. It's the way that we're going to deal with any of the issues present. Masculinity is traditionally is about isolation. It's about tribalism. It's about us versus them, and so you can see how that is in the way of global cooperation, global collaboration, global coalition. So masculinity has to shift from I'm going to protect me and my small tribe to recognizing that survival involves collaboration with the whole.
Yeah, and it has over evolution.
Well, for a long time you could say survival was just about your small group, but that is no longer true. So the guys who are like, look, masculinity is about survival and self-sufficiency, and all that is totally relevant, actually. It's just that self-sufficiency now requires collaboration.
Because the self or the tribe has now evolved as much as we can, as close as we can to the borders of the earth.
Yeah.
To the globalist perspective.
Yeah. Boundaries are breaking down, and masculinity is one of the things that holds boundaries in place.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, so feminism, 120 years. Roughly. And it's like kind of like a pendulum in many ways of swinging in some different directions. And so we had this like feminist, this kind of like divine feminist uprising, uplifting that's occurring, and that being seen in like things like Me Too and all these other ways of, like I saw Fortune's Most Powerful Women conference, and I was like, I reached out to them right away. I was like, oh, this is amazing. Like I was like watching two very powerful women on stage speak, and I was like listening to them, and they were speaking so intelligently, and I loved that. And I just see it happening, you know, I see the transition. So, okay, so this is, the past goes back evolutionarily before 120 years as well, and I was talking about the present. But give us a little breakdown of your understanding of the past and the present.
Well, I think within masculinity, or kind of its relationship to culture, masculinity was sort of based on these sort of pillars that we call the man box in this space. Like you can get into this, it's a structure of its own, masculinity, and it's built on a few pillars like self-sufficiency is one I keep mentioning, hypersexuality, heterosexuality, homophobia, domination or using violence to get what you want, aggression, and violence toward women. These are things that were part of the man box, and for a long time those were, I would say, shadows of what we really want from men, right? We do want men to be, in a way, self-sufficient, right? We do want men to be strong in a way, but there's pieces of that were left out. So now I think we're in a space of recognizing that you can have more than just the shade that is violent, the shade that is aggression. You can have direct assertion and have that also be empathic, understanding emotional intelligence around you, reading the data and saying, you know what, I'm going to be direct and assertive, and that does not include violence because I'm aware of this. So there's things within the man box that I think we want to let go of, and in the present, there's a fight. Some people want to keep that because it feels comfortable. If you're in a cave and going out of the cave is scary. So there are a lot of men who are in the man box, and it's very scary for them to leave it. The people who I think, like we are willing to go out of the cave, look around, see what's possible, explore other opportunities. We're changing the way masculinity operates. And so in the future, it's going to have to be collaborative. Luckily, I think it's going to set us free. As men, the man box can be very confining, and there's recent research that shows men who more adhere to the man box than other men, those men tend to be more violent toward others and more violent to themselves. They create more self-harm situations like suicide, like alcoholism, abuse, things like that. So the future looks really bright once we get past this change period, which is very turbulent.
I like how you went to the man box to describe the past and present and future. And I like the cave analogy is really good. So
Socrates, right?
What are the pressures that are keeping us in the box, and then how do we kind of like release those valves?
Yeah, you can kind of see it happening all around us in the politics and in the corporate game as well. There are rewards for appearing masculine, and this is true for women as well. We've seen that women in leadership roles tend to exude more traditionally masculine roles, and so
what is it? They're less agreeable. They're willing to like challenge more and stuff like that.
So Sheryl Sandberg has a great piece about how if you see a man being assertive, he's a leader. If you see a woman being assertive, she's a bitch, and that is partially true and also structurally created by us. Like we create that in the way that we operate.
Time for both of them to be leaders.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And also for when men are overly aggressive or angry, like this is one of the areas where masculinity is really breaking down, I think. We're starting to be allowed to have other emotions than just anger and lust. Anger is kind of the only thing men are allowed to do at work, right? And if you're angry at work, it's, oh, he really cares. He's passionate about the company, or he's passionate about the team, or he's passionate about the product, or whatever it is. Where if a woman is angry, she's really not allowed to have that emotion, right? She's sort of tamped down. Don't be angry. That's not a good leadership quality. So this is, again, where masculinity starts to get wrapped up in other pieces of our culture. Leadership itself is sort of layered within masculinity. So you're rewarded for being more masculine at work. You're rewarded for being more masculine in a lot of ways in our society. And you're clearly rewarded for being more masculine in things like politics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so part of the valve system is that we're rewarding the structures that are keeping the box together.
Yeah, so one of the ways that we know we can break this down is by creating more space for women in leadership roles in corporations, women in leadership roles in politics, women in leadership roles throughout our society. Because what happens is it creates diversity of thought throughout those spaces, but it also allows role models to exist for younger women, for girls. Yes.
So yes, that is tremendously important. See it, be it, and also getting the neurodiversity of thought. Trudeau apparently put, I think, 50% onto his cabinet, and I think that was a controversial thing to do because a lot of people were hoping to see people of competence in the domains that are needed filled in the positions, not just you need to fill a certain amount of people of certain color or gender or whatever into those boxes rather. And I don't know, what do you think about that?
I think you're asking about tokenism and the challenges of tokenism, right?
Yeah, can you teach us about that?
Yeah, so one thing that we know is in structures of leadership, if there's only one person of a certain intersection, an intersection being person of color, person of a different religion than the majority, anyone who's in an out group or an other group, this can be women as well. If there's only one of those types of people on at the leadership level, it can be very challenging for people underneath that group to rise up because they only see there's one role, so there's a competition. The more space you create for people of a minority group at the leadership level, the more collaboration exists, and the more likely meritocracy is to actually take hold within your organization. So white men tend to think that they live in a meritocracy. In fact, a large percentage of white men believe they live in a meritocracy.
Yeah, yeah.
Where the reality is the structural inequality around them has kept black women, has kept minorities out of their space.
Yeah, yeah.
So the opportunities to rise, the opportunities to grow aren't there. Now, the women who do rise up into these positions of power have typically gone through way more barriers or obstacles than the men. And that, I think, says something about when Trudeau allowed people into his cabinet who were women or who were outside of the majority group, those people have probably fought very hard to get to those positions.
Yeah.
Are the smartest people always in the best roles? I think that's a questionable
Interesting
idea.
How do we find a balance between always putting the smartest person in the role and also having neurodiversity?
How do you know what's the smartest?
How do you know what's the smartest?
I mean, this is the other thing, right? Like what we've prized as smart, what we've prized as leadership positions or possibilities has been traditionally masculine traits. Who's to say that that's correct? Who's to say that the smartest thing isn't to be more feminine in leadership? In fact, Gallup found out that women happen to be better managers of other women and of men. So why do we believe that being masculine is necessarily the best way to be? And the bias in that is invisible. It's hard to see it, but I think it's obvious once you start to step back and go, oh, the things I think are leaders, the things I think are traits of leaders, happen to also coincide with what I think men are. And when I step back from that and realize I need to open up my concept of leadership, it also means I need to open up my concept of masculinity.
Yeah.
You can see the threads just tearing apart, right?
Yeah.
The whole fabric of society is built on this.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, because when you have the word meritocracy and then you're trying to see the variables that are holding people back from ranking themselves up in a meritocracy, then that's like a really important thing to calculate. But then you also look into like what is the most intelligent person for the job? You know, how much research have we actually been doing? You were referencing a couple studies about this, and I think we just need more of those to best understand.
I agree. There are a lot more studies happening now than there were even 10 years ago. Just today, McKinsey and Lean In released their Women in the Workplace report. I haven't even gotten to read it all. I was reading it on the way over here. There's great research happening now, and all of that research points to a diversity at the leadership level is better for the entire company. Even if the best person isn't in that top role, having a woman in that role can be valuable for the rest of the company. Possibly more valuable than having the top person in that industry in that role.
Wow. Okay, so that would be the evidence that we would need to look through, because the number one argument that I get from the other side is just that, oh, there's no evidence about it, and I'm like, okay, but we need to try it to find the evidence.
There's a preponderance of evidence at this point. There's a preponderance of evidence. UC Davis did a report in 2015. They interviewed 600, I think, public companies. The ones who had higher gender representation at the leadership level performed 300% higher on return on equity than the companies with the average level. That's the average versus the best. That's not even the lowest versus the best. So the companies that are outperforming are the ones who are doing well with diversity at the leadership level, specifically within gender. That's UC Davis. That's based in the U.S. There are tons of studies all over in Europe as well. University of London has done one. The IMF has done one. There's no evidence to the contrary at this point.
So maybe what Trudeau did was actually beneficial.
If anything, I think a lot of people think of it as a symbolic gesture. And yes, it certainly is a symbolic gesture, but it's symbolically wise gesture. The opportunity for Canada is that they now have an entire country full of young girls who believe that they can become the best in their field. So they're going to strive to become the best in their field. And I think that's a long game win. And even in the short term, I think it's a win.
Interesting.
But I'm not an expert on Canadian politics, so.
But you are an expert on on all of this information that you're communicating right now. Well, especially regarding the studies that you've been bringing up, and you said that there's a preponderance of evidence in the direction. So This is exactly what we need to be talking about. So what do we do? What do we do? Okay, we're on this box, and the box,
Sure.
we're the valves we're slowly tweaking them so that the pressure is leaving this box, and we're walking out the cave, and we're looking around for other things, and maybe some of those other things are like, actually filling up positions of leadership in the meritocracy with very qualified people that are of neurodiversity and skin diversity from different cultures, and just thought diversity, etc. Neurodiversity is most important. And you can have neurodiversity for being a woman or being a man or being a person of color, etc. So I like to blanket it under neurodiversity.
Sure,
Yes.
but there's symbolic interaction between gender and culture. There's symbolic
Yes.
interaction between race and culture.
Yes.
So neurodiversity is valuable in and of itself, but also the symbolic interaction of those genders and races is valuable within any organization.
You're right, yes.
So I want
That's a
to
good
be
way
clear
put it.
about that.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say, okay, what do we do?
Yeah.
So the first step is that any guy who wants to be on this sort of good side of this, right, has to start to break down their personal bias and privilege. And the way that I do that is by determining where my intention is different than my impact. So for instance, whenever I am in a conversation with somebody and I offend them, let's say I offend somebody, because I'm ignorant to whatever I've just said being offensive.
Yeah.
My initial reaction to that is to defend my intention.
Yeah. Oh, always. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Because cognitive dissonance, right? I'm not a
Yeah.
bad guy, I'm a good guy. So my first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, oh, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, or don't take that the wrong way, or it was just a joke, or any of those defenses. Whenever I start to catch myself in that space, I have to start to then question, what is the impact of my word? What is the impact of my actions? That point, I start to empathize. At that point, I start to connect, right?
Yeah.
Asking questions like, I didn't know that would impact you that way. Can you share with me what that impacted you, like how that impacted you?
Yeah.
And what happens from that is connection. Boy, that's where everything starts to shift, right? At that point, men start doing individual work, their own individual work. And that allows us to start to do more of the community work.
I love that. Okay, so there's this sort of process of looking at the situation differently. It's just an augmented perception of each situation that you're in a situation more of maybe inquiry into someone else's shoes and soul and understanding of the world, their perception, rather than just having a perception that's judgmental, unidirectional.
Right.
So there's that. And then I just wanted to also say that we kind of live in an outrage culture right now.
Sure.
So it's a little bit, I think, important to distinguish that, like, if somebody is offended, to of course ask and get to know why. But at the same time, like, is someone offended that I ate a fish and they're pescatarian, or whatever? Like,
Sure.
They're not. Yeah, that they don't eat fish. They're vegetarian. Yeah, so like there's all these like weird ways people can be offended nowadays, and that is kind of harming us.
I don't know. It costs me nothing to ask somebody how I've impacted them. It costs me nothing. It's only positive.
It costs you time.
Oh, okay. But it costs them time when I don't ask. So the time is still spent. The question is, am I involved or not? And I want to be involved if I can be. Now, the reality is, yes, you're going to offend some people. For instance, the first time I ever did an interview on CNN, we were just talking about this 15 years ago or whatever, I went home to a bunch of hate mail and death threats from men who thought that I was letting everybody down by saying masculinity needed to be changed. Now, I offended a bunch of people.
Yeah.
That was challenging for me to deal with. That impacted them negatively. The reality is, there are a whole lot of other people who are impacted negatively by masculinity being broken. So I had to weigh out the utilitarian cost there. It is challenging to do this work. We do live in an outrage culture. If you're in the Me Too and Time's Up systems, if you're kind of paying attention to that, it can be challenging to go, okay, how do I act? How do I act sexually? If I am a man who is attracted to women, how do I do that without being offensive? And the reality is, the more open we are to connection, the more open we are to our impact, the more likely you are to succeed in all of that. I've had so many feminist icons, women who, Gloria Allred, who's like one of the toughest women out there in the feminist movement. She's the one who said on my website, you sound as if you're the leader of men of quality. Because the reality is, I just asked a bunch of questions like, what does it mean if I say this? How do you feel if I say this? And I got a lot of really great feedback, and she saw me as an ally at that point.
Yeah.
It's when we hide within our intention and we hide within our defenses that I think we lose opportunity to connect.
Yeah, I like that way of putting it. You're hiding from the ability, from the deeper connection potentially that exists. Yeah. You're staying in the cave, in the box. Okay, interesting. So now the valves are, the pressure's going. What is like an ideal way that the man does go out and seize the opportunity? You said that,
Sure.
we change our perception and we, care more about their perception, and then what else is going on there? Where are we going with that future?
Yeah, I think the next phase is that men have to start to collaborate with each other. We have to start to talk with each other about what does it mean to be a man, and am I hurting and not talking about it? Are you isolated and not telling me? Can I be helpful for you? Like, there's this opportunity for men to start to be in communication and communion with each other. At that point, we start to do our own work.
Yeah.
Right? We can't expect women and people of color to do our work as white men. We as white men have to do our work. So go join, like, the Mankind Project has groups of men all over the world that you can go be a part of, and probably tonight just go sit in a group of men who are willing to be vulnerable and talk about their stuff as dads, as leaders in their company, as men. And after that, we can start to do things in our organizations, in our religious communities, in our roles in society. But we can't do anything unless you start first with yourself. I always say there's 3 steps. Introspect, get to know yourself. What are you about? What's your thing? Respect, so start to respect the person sitting across from you or the people around you. And then connect. And connect means connecting with the person, but also connecting yourself with all the actions around you. And how can you be a force? How can you do, like Buckminster Fuller said, be the trim tab on the ship?
Mm-hmm.
Introspect, respect, connect. 3 steps.
Yeah, introspect, respect, connect. There's something in the air that's just wanting to, like, hold, there's something that wants to hold it back, but there's another thing that wants to explode it forward. And that's so interesting that how do you, with the introspect, respect, connect, how do you find a balance between going forth and being vulnerable, but also going forth and retaining some sort of the masculinities that can potentially help with leadership in a different way?
Sure. I grew up on John Wayne masculinity, right? I grew up in Texas, kicking down doors and having gunfights and stuff. That was my idea of masculinity when I was a kid. It wasn't until later as an adult when I started to look at John Wayne as a person and the way he chose to play certain roles, the roles he really cared about. The only role he really ever fought for was in a movie called The Quiet Man, which is actually based in Ireland, and it's about him going home to his sort of mother's immigrant's home and reintegrating into an entirely new culture. And in that process, he comes to terms with the fact that violence has been the totem pole of masculinity forever, and he wants to be a pacifist. John Wayne plays this role of a man trying to reinvent masculinity. This is in the 30s, 40s, and the concept that he came up against was so challenging that he had to fight through his own willingness to fight. So yes, of course we're going to need to be vulnerable with other men, with our spouses, with our kids, with the people around us. But at some point we are going to have to be men in some ways, like in ways of, like, for instance, last night I was at home and something in the house fell, made a loud sound. I got up. I'm the one who got up and ran around the house trying to protect the house. That's always going to be in me. But why? Why do I care? And I think every man who's ever gotten up in the middle of the house and tried to defend the castle, if they ask that question, the deep down truth is they love the people they're with, they feel vulnerable with them, they're the safest people that they can be around, and they want to protect them. So there's nothing not strong about being vulnerable. Vulnerability is where you find strength. Is that too cover of a book?
Vulnerability is where you find strength. And yeah, the example, there's been an evolutionary process that's made it so that we respond to the loud noise by protecting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's
That's never going to go away. I don't think.
Yeah. But then there's like well, why doesn't someone else, like, I don't know, like, why doesn't maybe your partner stand up and go, like, look.
I live in a very awesome 50-50 relationship, and my partner got up in the middle of the night with me, and she had her phone in hand with 911, and she went room to room with me, but I was the one carrying the sword, you know? And that is okay. It is okay to still want to ride horses and kick down doors, but knowing where your vulnerability
Interesting. Yeah.
lies.
That's it. Yes. Okay. So then it's like the children that are being born into the world get equality of opportunity of playing with all of the masculinities and femininities, and then they get to figure out what works, what vibes best with them.
So I think masculinity is becoming an art, whereas it used to be this very, it used to be a role you were assigned, and you had to play it, and there was no way out of it. And I think that's the man box. It's a trap. It's very challenging to be a 100% macho man. It's challenging to everybody around that person, and it's usually detrimental to the guy himself. So I think the opportunity in front of us is beautiful. I mean, I love the way I live my masculinity. I get to be vulnerable. I get to be strong. I get to be everything in between. And why not? The only thing holding us back from being more feminine or being a different kind of masculine is the structures around us telling us, don't do that. Do this, don't do that. Do this, don't do that.
Yeah.
And we use words that are typically feminized in order to tell you not to do things. Don't be a pussy, don't, right? Don't, these words are specifically about being feminine versus masculine. I just think they're wrong. They're out of date. It's time to try something new.
Yeah, that, I like how a lot of this comes back to trying something new and exploring what exists outside of the cave. Holy cow. Okay, so
there's so much.
There's so much, and I'm having such a good time talking about this because it's so difficult to figure this out, but I think you're making it very relatable. There's a lot of people that right now I feel are pressuring me to potentially say something along the lines of like, well, if you open up all of the opportunities of masculinities and feminities to every single child that's born into the world, well, is it a possibility that a child will get misguided by that they won't be able to identify who they are as easily because they're being pressured by society to be more of something that they are not, potentially, that they could be the opposite at times?
I don't know. When I walked into college, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to be. I walked in with an idea of a major, and then I spent a couple of years, I went to a bunch of different classes, I audited a few classes. I finally decided I wanted to do communications because it was this great connection of so many different of the things I liked. It had philosophy in it, it had business, it had sort of a design aesthetic within it, it had language, it had so much within it. Yeah. My point in using this allegory is that kids presented a whole lot of options are going to find their way, and we can create a whole lot of options for them, and they're going to find their way. I think the challenge for children right now is we present a very limited amount of options, and if they're not specifically within them, they're chastised or kind of kicked out.
It's like the blue or pink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So does it feel hard to raise kids now? I'm sure it does. I don't have children.
Oh my God.
I'm sure it does. But I also think there's a whole lot more opportunity for your kids now than there ever were before. Yeah.
Thank you, Ron. There's a lot of opportunity to explore for kids and to see what's best. Anyway, I can go on. There's so many people that have said that it's crazy that there's only blue and pink, but then there's so many other people that say that it's crazy to just purposely take your boy through the girl aisle or your girl through the boy aisle or whatever. It's so 50-50 on so many ways, and I care so much about openness. I care so much about the Copernicus moments, like the 1%. Yes. Like, what is the 1% saying that 99% is actually wrong on, rather than like just the 50-50s that are just butting heads against each other.
if your 2-year-old picks up a guitar walking through Toys R Us or whatever the equivalent is these days, does that kid necessarily become a musician? Maybe. But if you tell them, no, don't pick up that guitar, they're never going to explore it.
That's a good way to put it.
So let the kid explore things.
That's a good way to put it.
And this is true as adults as well. Why not explore different things? Like I think, get so pigeonholed as adults. I have a whole spreadsheet of stuff I want to learn, and I have it all categorized of things I love. The idea of different languages, the idea of different skills, and why not keep going with that? Lifelong learning, autodidacts, that's what we do, right?
What would you say is another good example with the guitar? That was a good one. Like, what else is another one? Like, if you say that, no, you can't play with this because it's not the right, gender or skin color, religion or whatever.
It's just that anything that is foreign to the family can get the kid into trouble.
I was just thinking about a Quran versus a Bible or whatever. Like,
right, exactly.
I was just thinking about that. Like, a kid that wants to look at another book of religion might not be able to because of, getting hurt for doing so.
Not allowed. So why, what's the danger in the idea? What's the danger in the exploration? I don't know if there is. Maybe. I mean, if they're exploring self-mutilation, okay, stop them. But.
Well, yeah. The danger could be that the cult of attention around that object loses a viewer who loses attention.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think this comes back to masculinity in that we have been taught as men to do one specific thing, and that is, be men, and within that, pick a role within society and be that until you're dead, basically. Let that do you to death. And I think that has to break as well, and this is part of the collaboration. Within ourselves, we also have to collaborate. There are pieces within us we've shut down, voices we've said no to, that we have to open up to. And that opening up allows things that I think are really beautiful. For instance, music. I've picked up music as a 32-year-old. I picked up a guitar. I'm 34 now. I'm picking up piano. I was told no. I use that as a personal example. But the idea that we have an opportunity as men to start to break down and say, well, this I want to keep from masculinity. I like this. This feels good. But this, I'm going to let that go, and I'm going to try some other things. Mm-hmm. And it's just like trying on a shirt at a store. I don't like it. Okay, take it off. There's nothing wrong with trying new things within masculinity. Yeah.
I like, so tons of masculinities, tons of femininities, tons of gray area, tons of things to pick and select and choose from to figure out how to best mold yourself into the world. And then I like the example of a color wheel. We've been using that quite a bit now on the show. It's just all 7.5 billion humans are different colors on the color wheel. It's not like one color is better than other colors.
Right.
It's just that we're different damn colors.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
I like that too. That's good.
Okay, cool. I'm glad that resonated. we're trying to come up with these analogies that best represent, like I also heard this one recently too, is that you have an equal soul to someone else, but your time might not be as valuable as that other person's. It's really strange to say that.
Huh.
It's like you can have a bunch of people pulling on someone's time that might be like a leading spiritual figure or whatever, whoever they are, and that way their time is more valuable than somebody that is not as high of a leading figure or whatnot.
I think you're talking about time and power in the same sentence.
Yeah.
The power to influence, the power to change something, the power to help people, whatever that power is sort of chunked down into the time element. Like that's the unit of power.
Yeah, but the souls are strangely equal. So the leadership up here and the leadership here, even though they have different levels of power, their souls are equal, but the time is not worth the same. It's very strange stuff.
Yeah, I'd have to argue with that one for a while, probably. But I like the idea. It's interesting.
Yeah, and I like the idea of kind of the wide array of equality of opportunity to the different masculinities, femininities.
Well, if you go down that road, what happens is you start experimenting and finding there's parts of you that you didn't know were there, and you start to open up to being more fully present within yourself. And I think it allows you to then empathize with other people. You have more nodes, more connection points to other people. So it allows you, I think, to be more inclusive within your work environment, within your family, within anyone around you. So opening within yourself, this is why this introspect is first step for me. introspection is about finding the pieces within you and allowing them to be present, which allows other people to then be more psychologically safe with you. And then that culture is what we want, right? If I go to work, I want it to be safe for the people around me and for me.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Loving, caring, harmonious with the mission of the company, but also with the employees that are building it and the customers that are using the product and being stewards of the world.
Right.
Dale, there's also there's something about this that I need to ask about, because I think it's just a crucial part of this.
Let's do it.
It's the education around this. What does a parent do to open their child to the different masculinities, femininities, etc. at a younger age, so that they don't get put into the box?
Yeah.
Or rather, the box never exists.
We know that children learn by example, by role modeling, right? So they look at what is happening around them and they essentially mimic it until they begin to change the way that they mimic it to be their own, right? They add their own flair to the mimicking. So I don't know how to raise kids because I don't have kids, but what I would say is the psychology of children is about watching the adults. So be what you want them to see. Mm-hmm. Be open to different kinds of masculinity within yourself or femininity within yourself, and also within others. The way you treat if you're a heterosexual, white, cisgendered male who has a son, and you treat a gay man of a different race, religion, etc., however you treat that person is how they're going to treat that person.
Yeah.
So just modeling this wake up is probably going to be plenty.
And then it's almost as though if you treat everybody with respect, then the child will treat everybody with respect. It's your role model. So role modeling is the first thing that you would say is crucial.
I think that's how we learn.
So we have to look at ourselves objectively in the mirror and work with ourselves, that introspection first.
One of the things we've learned in doing the inclusion work we do with big corporations, PricewaterhouseCoopers and many others, StubHub, et cetera, the men who have daughters seem to be the first men to come forward as allies, because they recognize that the world is challenging for their daughter in a different way than it is for their sons.
Yeah.
And they want to change the world around them so that by the time their daughter gets into the workplace, it's different, it's better for her.
So interesting.
So we have found, now I would love that wouldn't be true. I would love for all men to see this is something structurally wrong here. Can I do something about it? But I'll take what I can get, and typically that's men who have daughters.
It takes birthing a daughter into the world in order for the guy to be like, the world that she's going into is fucked up and needs to be augmented. It needs to be augmented to the next level.
I think it's just, as an observer, he's empathizing with a girl in a different way than he ever has before.
Ever has, yeah. Because this is his offspring. That's why. There's more energy put in.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not what got me into this work. It was a very dear friend who had a very challenging thing happen to her that was violent, and I wanted to figure out how to fix it, solve it, cure it. That was my wake-up call. Everybody has a different wake-up call, but we are finding that men with daughters start to look around the world that their daughters are growing up in and saying, how can I, as a guy in any position of privilege, do something to change this?
And the Better Man Conference is coming up on Friday.
The Better Man Conference is this Friday in San Francisco, and we also have a second conference in New York on November 6th.
And this is once a year for one day.
Right now it is. This is our third year doing the Better Man Conference.
Yep. And this one, you got one in SF, one in New York.
Right.
This is your first year doing two cities?
Yes.
Good stuff. Congratulations.
Yeah, we're excited.
Good stuff on the progress. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
400 people attend. This is a big deal now.
It's growing. The first year we were thrilled to have, I think, 120 or 140 people in the room. Actually about split demographically, so 55% men and 45% women. Now, you've been to the Women in Tech conference, so you know when you go to an inclusion conference, it's typically women and like a very minority of men. This was a split. It was great.
Yeah.
So that was really great, and we just kept going. There was no market for this when we started. It was very challenging to get going, and we're finding that especially since the election and the Me Too movement and Weinstein coming out as a problem, companies want to do something. They want to change this. There are a lot of good men in the positions of power in our world who want things to be better, who are waking up to their privilege to change something and are leveraging it. So the Better Man Conference is a way to start doing that.
Yeah, rallying together the next generation of leadership in equality. I love it. I love it. It's the future. It's the future of masculinity.
Yeah.
It is. It is. There's no future of masculinity that I see that's not it's not prosperous. The one that I see where there's not equality of opportunity.
Yeah.
It looks disgusting. It looks disturbing. It looks like a big fight. It looks like a big revolution. And I don't want to be a part of that bloodbath or that suffering. I want to be a part of equality of opportunity. I want to be a part of the future of masculinity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Being vulnerable and loving and calm and caring towards people, and that's the future.
I agree. And it's my experience that the majority of men want that future. I fundamentally believe men are good at heart, want to be good. The balance of men believe in the possibility of collaboration with women and equality with women and others. They just don't know, I think, where to do the work.
Yeah.
So that's where we come in.
Exactly, yeah.
Thousands of times I've worked with groups of men and individual men on learning to assert their privilege in ways that helps others around them. And things change. Corporations entirely change. When one company that employs 100,000 people changes their culture, that's a big change.
It's a massive change, yeah. It's so interesting that Google and all these other companies that prioritize diversity, inclusion, and all these other things have been so scrutinized for it, and it might have just been the most important thing that they could have been doing all along. Does it go too far at times? Possibly. You might be sacrificing meritocracy in some places. Does that mean that we actually now know that maybe those sacrifices were actually maybe more worthwhile because what they gained for neurodiversity was actually significantly more? So this is all new stuff to unpack and continue digesting really and understanding.
Well, it's time to get involved, to be honest with you. If you're a guy who believes himself to be a good man, the silence while you're considering what to do can be perceived as a tacit approval of what's happening around you.
That's true. Neutrality can be an action, yeah.
Neutrality is an action. So if you think about it in a sense of a game, if you sit still for a turn, you're likely to get hit. Right? Will Rogers said the people that stand still are the ones that get passed up, right?
Yeah.
So be present with, I don't know what's going on exactly. I feel like I have some privilege, but I don't know exactly where to assert it. And start to show up. Your body in the right place can do a lot of good. Going to the Women in Tech conference is a great way to do it. Go to the Better Man conference, great way to do it.
Yeah, and then the ways to open up like one-on-one with each other would be like, what would be a good way to have like two guys or a guy and a girl or whatever? How would it be? How would you guide an opening up session?
The way I do it is I just say, do you have any like good friends who you connect with about life stuff, real stuff? And most guys say, no, not really.
Like emotion is what you're trying to get at.
Is anybody supporting you in your real life? Because most of the guys I see, they have drinking buddies.
Work. Yeah. Drinking buddies is a big one.
And drinking buddies, from drinking buddies to friends, that's the gap you have to make. And the gap is very simple, and all you have to do is say, hey, I really appreciate our friendship. And what's going on with you in your real life? Let's get real.
Damn, the drinking buddies things, like you go out and you grab a beer and you talk about whatever that's not related to your emotion or your like family or your most vulnerable spots. Yeah.
But you're wanting to talk about real stuff. Yeah. Everybody's there for like, I just need to be around a guy who gets it. And you can just say that out loud. I just need to be around a guy who gets it. Can I talk for a second about what's going on with me and my relationship? Yeah, okay. Most guys are super open to that because they need help too.
And as long as there's a strong sense of like authenticity and like genuine interest in what you're saying, and like they don't just transition to talking about what about the next thing that's surface level after you finish talking, because then it's like you didn't even.
And if you don't have friends like that in your life, get some.
Get some through going to cool organizations
Yeah.
in your local areas. We have cool things like Circling Institute that help with things like this. You know?
Bingo.
Yeah, we were talking about enthusiastic consent culture. There's so many orgs and meetups that focus on that slow-paced, meditative. The center in SF is a good one as well. Like yogic practices.
You don't have to do it alone is the point.
You don't have to do it alone. Yeah. Find them as soon as. But that's a good action item, is to find the heart-centric.
Yeah.
People to do this with.
I mean, veterans go to the VFW and they do it probably weekly, and they sit around and they talk about their feelings. So if the toughest guys in the world can do this, you can.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Dale. Just one question on the way out that we typically ask our guests is, what do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
I'm tempted to say the top of a mountain. I think that's probably it. The few times in my life where I have felt completely awake have been at the tops of mountains.
And why?
It's just presence. Like for me, it's a culmination point. Like, let me just be fully present with this point, this moment. And within that presence, there's usually, I think, vista and beauty and space and fresh air and things like that. But typically for me, getting to the top of a mountain usually requires a hike of some kind. And so there's a sense of accomplishment, a sense of being in life, being present.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's also something interesting about the vibration that might go up to that peak from Earth, that feeling up there.
Mountains are a place where change happened millennia ago.
Yeah.
So going to a place that seems so set, but recognizing that it is the literal point of upheaval on the planet. It's a nice dichotomy. For me, that's a really good fit, because I think life is all about being present in the moments of upheaval, recognizing where you're set.
Yeah. Get a nice bird's eye view.
Yeah. I love perspective. That's my favorite.
Yeah. Oh, wow, what a freaking pleasure this has been. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
This is great.
Yeah, this is only the beginning of the future of masculinity.
Truly.
Yeah, and thank you for your work in the space. 15 years of this, it's been a long ride for you, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for caring.
You're welcome. You're welcome. We've had great people from like Circling Institute on the show before, and Aurora Quinomo from Enthusiastic Consent Culture, and I hope it's good that we made those intros and so that you guys can connect, but I hope the conversation rolls with more people around the world in this respect. There's a lot to open ourselves up to outside of the boxes that hold us back, the boxes that culture and the political economic systems put us into. So if we can figure out how to get outside of those boxes and explore what's outside of them to best be ourselves, let's do that together. Give us your comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. We would also like to recommend you to go and build, go create, go manifest your destiny into the world. If this type of show and content gives you good feelings, good energy moving forward, good knowledge, we'd greatly appreciate your support. Our Patreon and cryptocurrency links are below. It'd be much appreciated. Ron, thank you for producing and directing. Dale, thank you for joining us. Much love, everyone.